Hello, everyone, and welcome to the moment you've all been waiting for. It's the big clash, India versus China, Arjun Erigaisi versus Wei Yi, to say who goes into the semifinals of the FIDE World Cup and who will eventually maybe qualify for the candidates tournament. This is game two of the Rapids. The first two classical games, those ended in a draw. The first Rapid game ended in a draw, and this is now the second Rapid game, which means that if it's a draw, we go into further tiebreaks. If not, then whoever wins goes into the semifinals of the FIDE World Cup. Let's check it out. It's an amazing game. Arjun with white opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5, knight f3, and knight to f6. Wei Yi goes for the Petrov defense, which is usually met with knight captures on e5, but the d4 is also the second most popular. I believe this is the Steinitz attack. Knight captures on e4. You could also play e captures on d4, but for this level, knight captures on e4 is to be preferred, I would say. Bishop to d3, pawn to d5, and knight captures on e5. We have knight to d7, knight to c3, knight captures, b captures, and bishop to d6. So all been played before, nothing really new happening here. We have castles kingside, castles, castles, rook e1, we have pawn to c5, and knight captures on d7. Queen captures and queen to h5. Looks scary, but still all theory. As you can see, they're just gaining time, not even burning time on the clock. We have pawn to g6, queen to f3, and pawn to c4. Going after the light square bishop, we have bishop to h6, trying to give up the bishop for that, or basically the two bishops for the rook, but it is known that rook to d8 is the move black has to play here. We have bishop to e2 and queen to f5. Again, still all theory, and we're following a very well-known game. Pawn to g4, queen captures, bishop captures, and bishop to e6. Okay, here we burned a little bit of time. Arjun goes pawn to a4, showing that he's still well within his preparation, and we reach the sort of deviation point of the preparation, where there is a game Niels Grandelius played against Mertiel Mazierli in the individual European Championship of 2023. That game ended in a draw, and the bishop to c7 is the move that was played there, I imagine, to counter any a5 in the future, or maybe to prepare a5 b6. But here we have bishop to f8 by Wei Yi, and it is now as of move 17 that we have a completely new game. Okay, bishop g5, avoiding the trade with an attack on the rook. We have rook d7 and pawn to h4. Okay, we have king to g7, king to g2, bishop to d6, and rook a to b1. Nicely putting pressure on that b7 pawn. You might double up, so it could be a problem for black. So pawn to b6, we have rook to b5, again with ideas of maybe rook b1, a5, or maybe rook to a1, a5. Definitely it will be white who will be choosing when the breakthrough happens. We have bishop to c7, keeping an eye on that a5 square, and bishop back to c1, trying to shift the bishop over to this diagonal. We have pawn to h6, saying that, okay, maybe instead of bishop c1, you should have went with pawn to h5. Now I can be very flexible here. Bishop back to d1 and rook to e8. Okay, we have pawn to f4, as that rook on e8 is a target, so f5 will be a problem. So rook d to d8 and rook back to b1. Okay, we have bishop to d7, offering a rook trade, rook captures, and the rook to a1, again hinting at a possible pawn to a5. And rook e1, while it does look very active after you attack that rook, the rook just has to go back. I mean, it cannot remain there. The king covers all of the squares. So after rook to e1, bishop to d8, attacking the h4 pawn, and Arjun just advances it. Pawn to g5. We have h captures, bishop to f5, and bishop to f3, offering the c2 pawn for the d5 pawn. And interestingly, Wei Yi doesn't just play bishop to e4. Instead, he decides to give up the base of his pawn chain for a double c pawn, which makes zero sense to me, but that is what he plays. But okay, he's Wei Yi, obviously. He knows what he's doing. Bishop captures on c2, bishop captures on d5 by Arjun, and now bishop to d3, defending the c4 pawn. We have rook to a2, now stopping any rook to e2 from Wei Yi, and bishop to c7, putting pressure on the f4 pawn. King f2, for the moment, it is nicely defended by the c1 bishop, and pawn to f6. We have g captures, king captures, bishop to e3, and now rook to h8. Wei Yi tries to go in from behind and win the game on the spot. So bishop back to g2 and rook to h4, putting pressure on the f4 pawn, and pawn to d5 by Arjun, giving up the f4 pawn. Bishop captures on f4. We have pawn to a5. Arjun going for activity. Bishop captures on e3. King captures and pawn to b5, not allowing the file to open up so the rook can harass the black king, from behind and from the a file and so on. Rook to f2 with check, and now probably he was hoping for king to e5 and then he can infiltrate with the rook, but Wei just stops him from infiltrating. Bishop to f5, and he says, all right, where's the compensation for your pawn? At some point, I might play b4, sacrifice it, and then create a pass pawn. I already have a pass pawn here, so it just seems like I'm up a pawn. And Arjun goes to rook to b2. Point being that if you go pawn to d6, the king can just stop that pawn. There's really nothing there. And if bishop to c6, going after the pawn, you can just trade. Captures, captures. Now you go king c5. Still, you're down a pawn. You're going to lose this pawn, and there's really nothing for Arjun here. So after bishop to f5, rook to b2, going after the b5 pawn, a6 and pawn to d6 by Arjun, now saying, all right, you can have that d6 pawn. I'm going to gobble up all of the queenside pawns, or, hopefully most of them. King to e6, we have rook to d2, now preparing to d7, and that will win the game this way, and bishop to d3. Just cutting off the rook, and now king captures on d6 is the threat. We have rook to f2. Again, you could also go for bishop to b7 right away. Rook to f2 is the attempt. Now with the idea of captures, then rook f6, and then you start capturing. But bishop back to f5. Wei says, nope, not happening. We have rook to d2, and now comes rook to h7. And rook to h7 is a bad move. Here, you have to go king to d7. It's the only move that wins. The problem for Arjun is that rook to h7, although it's a bad move, I would say with 45 seconds on the clock, it is impossible to realize why. It allows him back in the game, but just saying that and without showing you this line, it would be completely meaningless. So what would you play here? You're trying to survive this as white. Could you find this move? It's so atypical of anything a human would do. Even spoiling that for you a little bit. But what would you play here to try and survive this position? While I give you a couple of seconds. Believe it or not, the move is rook d5, the only move that doesn't lose the game for white. And the reason for that is that white, what can black do to try and push? Let's say we go for b4, and that is the move that should win for black in pretty much every line. Now, after c captures, pawn to c3, and let's say pawn to d7, you trade, rook captures, let's say rook captures, king captures, and bishop to f1. You go after the a6 pawn. c2, you have to block, king to d2, let's say pawn to g5. Okay, you capture on a6, and this is the position you get. Two connected pass pawns versus two pass pawns, and now we can even play it out. Let's say pawn to g4, bishop to e2. Okay, you can go pawn to g3, bishop to f3, you stop g2, king to c7, and now after, let's say, pawn to b5, preparing to get those pawns. If you can get those pawns on dark squares with the bishop controlling the light squares, then you're going to be winning. But after king to b8, that's not that easy to achieve. After b6, let's say bishop g4. Now you're trying to get that bishop away from this diagonal so you can play g2, g1. And after bishop to g2, you go bishop to c8. You have to stop pawn to a6. That's the only way to do it. And after king captures, now you go bishop b7. And that's pretty much it. Now, if you trade, then black is winning, of course, because the king is too far away. And if you move the bishop, then just g2. Now the bishop has to be sacrificed, captures, and it will be a draw. Once you win both of these pawns, it will be a draw by insufficient material. So that's the way it would play out. But yeah, if you don't find rook d5, you cannot draw this game. So bishop to c6 is what Arjun tried, and now the position is winning for Wei. Rook to h3 check. We have bishop to f3 and the bishop to d3. Again, cutting off the rook, and now you are winning that pawn without Arjun getting anything in return. We have king to f4. King captures on d6. We have bishop to b7. Okay, you go after the pawn. pawn to b4. You are just too quick here with the bishop already covering the c2 square. So it's just going to be capture c2, and that's it. So c captures on b4, c3, rook to d1, c2, everything with tempo. So now the pawn is even defended. So even that isn't going in Arjun's favor. We have rook to c1, and now bishop to f5, announcing his next trick, and that is rook b3, rook b1, and you win the game. So bishop to f3, preventing the rook move, or rather the rook maneuver. Rook to h4 check. We have king e3, and rook captures on b4. We have bishop to e2, rook to b1. It was unstoppable. King to d2, and rook captures on c1. We have king captures, and now king to c5. So we even got a better version of that endgame that we've discussed, because now it's 3 pawns versus 1. Bishop captures on a6. Arjun picks off one of them, but king to b4, and you cannot defend that pawn. We have king to d2. King captures on a5. We have bishop to c4, and now king to b4. This is well past Resign's territory, but there is so much on the line here. Arjun absolutely must try everything, maybe somehow to achieve a draw, maybe some stalemate, who knows what. Bishop g8 to g5. Now it's merely a matter of way advancing those pawns. Bishop d5, g4, bishop g2, g3, bishop f3, king b3. And here, after a couple of more moves were played, the king reached the bishop, or rather the g2 square. Bishop moved, pawn was pushed, bishop was captured, bishop captured the pawn, king captured the bishop, and that's it. Now it's now everyone could win it. You get the king over to c2, you push away the king, and now, of course, you prevent stalemate by going king to c3, and after king to a3, now you queen the pawn with check. King a4, queen to b2, again trying to get some sort of a stalemate, but queen b7, Wei Yi is engine precise, and after king to a4, queen to a6, Wei Yi delivers checkmate and eliminates Arjun Erigaisi from the FIDE World Cup. So yeah, Wei Yi advances to the semifinals. We'll see who he faces there, as the other two games are, or rather the other two matches are still being played. So yeah, tough break for Arjun, but great stuff for Wei Yi. We'll be seeing him in the candidates probably, but then again, you never know. I mean, it's hard to say that someone who eliminates Arjun Erigaisi does not go into the candidates, but with everything you've seen this World Cup, I would say anything more than anything is possible. So I really hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Benjamin Azran, Kevin Burke, Eddie Sphere, Brian Pratt, and David Gasparian for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.